Most of you all know here, if you know me, I'm a graduate of Auburn University. I graduated from there 21 years ago, and people will ask me, well, are you an Auburn fan? And I was like, well, of course. Isn't that the whole point of it? You go to school there to become a fan. You're a fan of your school, but not everyone is. And so automatically I've alienated half of you. You don't like me now, and may not listen to anything else I say, but so this past spring, I watched with great, really amazement, Auburn's basketball team run to the Final Four, beating teams like Kansas and North Carolina by large margins. And then Auburn's best player, lost their best player, Chuma Okeke, got injured. And so it looked like the tournament would be over, and Auburn beat Kentucky to make it to the Final Four. And so then we watched that game against Virginia. And what a gut-wrenching loss. And so I had to put the pain of disappointment in losing that game in perspective of making it that far. Such an incredible journey for Auburn's team. But I did, I guess, kind of make the mistake after that game of going to social media, which is not always advisable, especially after the passions of an intense game. And I had done that some before. Try to always keep it positive. And so I was doing that and congratulating Virginia on a great game, because I know all their fans were watching to see what I would say. But I did congratulate them and made a comment about how far Auburn had made this year, and just imagine what could have happened if we'd had our best player. Just imagine what could have happened. Well, not too long after that, someone replied, because those comments are out there for everyone to see, and someone replied to my message, and this was a person called Coach Kirby Smart was their tagline. Not the real Coach Kirby Smart, because there is like they have like a check mark if that's really them. And this person, obviously a Georgia fan, and so a very big Georgia fan. And just for the record, I have no problem with Georgia fans. In fact, I'm married to a graduate of the University of Georgia. And all of her siblings, Molly's brothers and her sister, all have at least one degree from University of Georgia each. And so I love Georgia people. But this guy made a very insulting comment, not only in response to my tweet, but about me and just about all Auburn people in general. And so I can't even read it to you. I can't even tell you what he said, because it's not really polite to even say in church. And so I saw this, and immediately I was kind of hurt. I would love to say that my first response to such a personal attack, and not only talk about a personal attack, but about my school too, would be that it was, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. But that wasn't my first response, my first thought. And I thought, hey, now this is how all the Alabama fans feel. When you go to the championship game, and whether you win or lose. Because Georgia, we weren't even playing Georgia. Why would he even want to rejoice over Auburn being beaten in the Final Four? And it seemed like if you're anything, you should be pulling for your fellow conference colleagues, right? And shouldn't you do that? You would all pull for Auburn, right? You were all pulling for us, weren't you? So immediately after this kind of the shot wore off, I started thinking of all of the great comebacks. Here's this person, it's not even their real name, and I started thinking of all the rhetoric, the insults, the comebacks, the put-downs that I could reply with. And I will tell you that if I wasn't the model of self-control and humility that you see before you today, that if I'd have been a bit younger, maybe if I was like 35, I might have replied to Coach Kirby Smart, but I didn't. I took the post down, which is probably the best thing. I should have probably never made it to begin with. But that's the danger of digital communication, of non-synchronous, disembodied communication, is that it sort of opens the door, it provides really an environment where that kind of toxic communication can thrive, where you get into, whether it's a text message, whether it's a Facebook post, whether it's tweeting, even maybe to a lesser extent emailing, where you get into this trading back text messages, trading back tweets, insulting, anger building. You have the perfect response. You think, I've got this drop the microphone statement, the perfect insult. There's no way they're going to have a comeback to this. And of course, they do have a comeback to that. And then you just get madder and madder and madder. And things that you would never say to someone face to face, you say in a text message. You say in a Facebook post or in a tweet. Well, there is a term that describes people who go online, particularly to provoke, to harass individuals, and the term is called troll. You might think of, when you hear the word troll, you might think of a mythical cave-dwelling creature, sort of related to a gnome, something you might stick in your garden somewhere. Troll is not very friendly sounding. Gnomes, that's kind of friendly, but troll, probably not. Well, if you look this up, the first definition would be the mythical cave-dwelling creature. But the second definition would be this. Comes from the internet. A person who starts quarrels or upsets people on the internet to distract and sow discord. That is a troll. Now, some of you might be trolls. You might be a troll. You might have that parody account, okay, where you go in and you have the perfect insult, the perfect put down, and you can hide behind your alter ego. You can say all those things that you really want to say in person, but you're kind of afraid to, and you can put it out there, and it's out there for the whole world to see. You might be a troll. But I think probably for most of us, when we're passionate about something, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, whether it's a moral issue of the day, whether it's even religion, your faith belief, when we go out there and we post something on social media about it, we don't do so intending to start a fight with anybody. Okay, we're just passionate about what we believe in. We read something, we think, wow, amen, this is what I believe. I want everyone else to see it. Maybe you want to persuade people that you care about so that they'll feel the same way about this thing that you feel so strongly about, that others feel about. But what happens is sometimes that there's people that feel differently, and then they'll post something up there, and then you defend yourself, and again, it gets into this negative, this toxic cycle. You don't intend to get that way. You don't intend for it to go that way, but it does. And this is kind of the danger with digital communication in general. Because the way that it's designed is that digital communication, text message, email, social media, digital communication provides convenience and control. It's convenient for us. It's so much easier to send a text message. I mean, you don't know if someone may be busy, they may not be able to respond to they may be able to take a call at that particular moment. And so it's non-invasive, it's convenient, they can respond when they want to. And it also gives you control. You have more control over what you say. What you might not think of in the moment, it doesn't come to you. The perfect thing to say never does come to you in that moment. You always think of it later. It gives you a chance to respond, and then as you're typing, if you want to back up and erase something and change something, you can go back. You can even delete that post that you made or that tweet. You can go back and take it down. It gives you control. Digital communication provides convenience and control. But the flip side of this, the danger of this, is that it also provides a haven of negative communication. And so those conversations that we need to have that might be difficult, or those things that would be hard to hear, it's so much easier to send it via a text message than via a face-to-face conversation. And so what happens is that most negative interactions get relegated to the digital world. We do send it via text message. We have a problem, we go out there and post it on social media. It gets relegated to the digital world. And things that should be said in person, face to face, they are said over a text message. People get broken up, relationships break up over a text message. They break up, I broke up with you over a text message, or found out that I lost my job over a text message, or whatever. So now the thing is ghosting, not even showing up for work or not for the date or whatever. That's my message to you, that we're no longer in a relationship because of not even showing up. And so negative interactions get relegated to the digital world. Well, there's a lot of different ways we can respond to this. You can get sucked into a tweet storm or into a series of text messages. But in this age of unprecedented accessibility, my advice is don't feed the trolls. Don't feed the trolls. You see, there used to be a day that you could kind of get away from it. Okay, you got that person, they sent you something negative. When I was growing up, like if there was someone at school, if you had a disagreement with your friends, or if there was a bully, somebody was picking on you, harassing you, or whatever, you could go home, close the door, and you didn't have to worry about it. That was like a safe space. That was a haven. Well, those days are gone, because now through instantaneous communication, literally at any time, in your home, in your bedroom, at night, you can't get away from it. You can be communicated with at any moment. Well, I think the solution is don't feed the trolls. Jesus actually had some advice about this. Jesus spoke to real life situations. And I believe that Jesus' wisdom has application to us today as well. Jesus spoke about how to deal with situations, negative encounters that we have with other people. And he spoke about this in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. Jesus said, if your brother or sister sins, brother or sister implies not just family relation, but somebody who's close to you. If your brother or sister sins, some of the texts, the manuscripts say sin against you, so some of the versions say if your brother or sister sins against you, then you should go and post about it on social media. Yeah. You should air all your grievance. Maybe you don't name them by name, but you talk about, this is how some people treat me, Don't you just hate it when or go and talk to someone else about it. Go and talk to somebody else about what they did to you, or send a tweet, or no, Jesus didn't say do any of that. If your brother or sister sins, go and tell them. Go and point out their fault just between the two of you. Now, automatically, for some of us, probably for most of us, our anxiety level rises because we don't like confrontation. It's much easier to send a text message, maybe even to have a phone conversation, than to have a face-to-face interaction, a face-to-face meeting, a face-to-face conversation. But when we do that, it reminds us of the goal of the communication to begin with. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. That's the goal of the conversation, is reconciliation. To win them over, that they would hear you. If they've committed a wrong against you, that they would admit it, that they would repent, that they would confess, they would ask for forgiveness, and the relationship be restored. That's the goal. But for a lot of us, we're not at that place. Or we are afraid to have a meeting like that. Maybe we're afraid that it might not go well. We might be persuaded in a different way. But for some of us, we're not there because we want to punish them. We're in a place we don't want to reconcile. We want to punish. And it's harder to have that conversation because we don't want to restore the relationship. And this is the blessing and the drawback of digital communication. Digital communication provides convenience and control. But the reality is that human beings cannot be controlled. Another human being cannot be controlled. And while you might have the perfect statement that you can send to end the conversation, human beings cannot be controlled. And there's something to be said when you meet together, especially when it's someone who has committed a wrong against you, to look them in the eyes, to shake their hand if you're at that place where you can do that, to listen to their voice, and to realize that they are a human being just like you. To meet them on common ground, to realize that they have wants, they have needs, they have desires, and they are made of flesh like you, and they fail like you. You see, it's easier to empathize when you're looking someone in the eyes. And sometimes we're afraid to have a meeting like that just because we know we'll be persuaded, or maybe we're afraid we'll back off our convictions or whatever. It's so much easier to send a text message than to have a face-to-face meeting, because then you're required to deal with an embodied human being, another human person like you. When I was appointed to a church, a different congregation, a few years ago, I had a phone call from a lady who was upset about a decision that had been made at the church before I came there. And this was regarding a staff change that had happened, and there was a staff member who was let go, who she was not happy about that, and was not happy just about the whole situation. And she felt like that I had not heard her grievances, and others who shared her opinion, and had kind of taken sides, which I didn't feel that way, but I didn't feel like it would be productive to drag up things that had already taken place in the past. And but it became clear in the middle of the conversation that she had no interest of reconciling or reaching any kind of agreement. She just wanted me to tell me off and then to hang up the phone and to be done with the church. And anytime someone calls you and they're aggressive or there's accusations, it's hard not to be defensive or to defend yourself. And this was 10 plus years ago, and I was not the picture of moral, of humility and of self-control that you see before you now. But I probably did get a little defensive in that phone conversation, but she said her piece, and she hung up the phone, and I never saw her again to darken the door of that church. And after that conversation was over, I thought to myself, I said, the next time that happens, that conversation should not have happened over the phone. That the next time that someone calls me and they're going through a list of grievances, that I'm going to say, okay, wait a minute. We're not going to continue this conversation until we can meet face to face. Because it's so much harder to walk out that door and not to have met on some common ground than when you meet face to face than either a text message or a phone conversation or an email or a Facebook post or whatever. So I wonder in your life, how many of the most negative interactions that you've ever had, how many of those were in person versus being over the phone or via some kind of impersonal media like a letter or a text message or whatever? How many of them, and I'll bet that more of them were not in person as compared to being in person. See, I believe that following Jesus' advice on this, to meet face to face when there's a wrong that's been committed, and to have some occasion of finding common ground and understanding, I believe that it'll solve 80% of the disputes that we have with other people. Now, that you might think that's kind of ambitious or maybe too optimistic, but I believe it could solve 80% of the problems that we have. But for those other 20%, Jesus continues in verse 16. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along. Okay? so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, this last statement here is actually in quotations because Jesus is quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 19, which is the Old Testament law, the law of Moses, where they were to determine whether someone was guilty or not. You can't just condemn or convict someone on the witness of one person, that it takes 2 or 3 witnesses. And so Jesus says, bring some other people into the conversation. And automatically, when he says this, when he says take 1 or 2 others, you kind of get a sense there's already a preparation for a parting of the ways here, that there's a distrust, that there's been a breach that can't be bridged, that you would bring other people in, because naturally, probably you're going to bring in other people who feel the same way as you do. But this is the next step. And there have been meetings that I have had that I wish I'd have had someone else there with me. Because sometimes what you say can be misconstrued, and sometimes it's just a little bit less stressful when someone else is a part of the conversation. But if this doesn't work, if even this doesn't work, then you can attack them all you want, okay? Then let them have it. Then Jesus says, but if they refuse to listen, let them have it. That's it. You're done. No, that's actually not it. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And here you see, here's the context. The church, the Greek word there is ekklesia, which means those who are called out. Another word we could use there would be assembly, the larger group of Christians. Share it with them. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan. The Greek word there is Gentile, someone who's outside of the faith, sometimes outside of the community of faith, or a tax collector. In other words, they don't share the same values as you do. It's probably better that you part ways. But even in that case, you still love them. I mean, the tax collectors, the unbelievers, the prostitute, everyone who was outside of that community of trust, Jesus loved them. Jesus reached out to them. He shared the gospel with them. He wanted them to be a part of the community. And so at no place here do we see that vindictive attacks, returning evil for evil, these arguments that we get into, these negative interactions that oftentimes are especially not just digital, but in-person communication that can devolve into. That's not what's best. And what Jesus is reminding us in all of this is that behind every troll, there's a soul. That is a human being, unless it's one of those robo-trolls, one of those robo-tweets, because I think there are out there, those accounts. But behind every human being troll, there is a soul. And it's true that digital communication provides convenience and control, but in-person communication has greater power to make strained relationships whole. And there's nothing that causes more stress in your life than strained relationships. Nothing causes more stress than strained relationships. And that's why when our relationship with God was strained, God didn't bridge the gap by sending a text message, by going on a tweet storm, okay? In fact, if you look at the Old Testament, if you just looked at the Old Testament law, you might see that you see lots of thou shalt nots, lots of very strict laws and severe consequences. You might see a troll. That's all you see. But God didn't relegate His communication to us in just the sphere of text messaging. He came in the flesh, in a human body. Far from a disembodied communication, He came as a human being. John chapter 1 verse 14. It says, the Word became flesh. He met us face to face. He looked us in the eyes. And so we see that God loves us, not just by what He said, but what He did. God touching, God healing, God dying, God saving us from our sins. And so, when you encounter trolls, okay, in your life, and next time you're tempted to go on a tweet storm or tell everybody off in a text message, don't. Don't do it. Respect that person's humanity, even if they're not there in their best place, to meet them face to face. To do your part, even if it might not be possible to find common ground for reconciliation to restore the relationship. Because that, my friends, is what God has done for us. So let's follow that example. Let's follow Jesus' teachings. Let's don't feed the trolls.